Let's get started. Thanks for being here, everyone. This is my project, 2020, visualizing the spread of COVID-19 pandemic and government responses across the United States. So my goals with this project were to examine possible relationships between government policies in response to the pandemic and COVID-19 cases. So I wanted to do three things. I wanted to visualize government interventions, I wanted to visualize the spread of the virus, and I wanted to show those changes over the course of the year of 2020. I also wanted to create a survey to see if other people, how people perceived and interpreted those visualizations. Did they perceive a relationship? Did they even understand the data I was visualizing? And were there any possible underlying biases that would affect how they understood and interpreted that data? Okay, there we go. So my main data source for this was the Oxford COVID-19 Government Response Tracker. They are a research group based out of Oxford, and they're amazing. They look at every government across the world, actually, and they evaluate it based on 20 policy indicators and create 4 different indices to measure from 0 to 100 how much that government is doing in response to the virus. And their data is freely available on GitHub, and yeah, that was a great resource. I also started to use data from the Census Bureau, the American Community Survey from 2018. One of my early objectives was to see what possible demographic or environmental factors this had on the virus, but as I changed the focus of my project, I didn't use that data as much, but I did use the ACS shapefiles and population data. So my first step was to take that massive data table from the Oxford group and decide what I wanted to focus on. So I had data for every single day for every single state. So I wanted to focus on the 1st and the 15th of each month. And I wanted to focus on the Containment Health Index, which looked at policies having to do with community restrictions as well as health policies like mask mandates and testing and vaccines. So I exported that data into a different table, and I joined that with the state polygons and enabled the time properties so that I was able to look at how those things changed over the course of the year. So the first visualization I made was this dot density GIF. I made it into a GIF. And basically there's a dot density showing confirmed cases, 1,000 confirmed cases for each dot over a choropleth map showing the Containment Health Index for each state. And the second one I did was a case rate GIF, which shows the case rates of each state, and that's just total number of cases divided by the total population of each state. And so that's like a transparent dot pattern that gets denser as the case rate gets higher, and the labels only appear if the case rate's over 2% with the same choropleth map underneath that. I also made 2 different Tableau visualizations. One of them is a choropleth map on the left with the date filter and a value filter for the Containment Health Index. And on the right is a screenshot of a chart that I made that shows confirmed cases, confirmed deaths, and the CHI with the drop down so that you can look at that over the course of the year for each state individually. And then I also made 2 bivariate maps. And they actually visualize the same thing, case rates and the Containment Health Index on January 1st, 2021, but it uses 2 different classification methods. On the left, it uses the equal interval ranges, and on the right, it uses natural breaks. So the point of the survey was to use those visualization methods and to ask responders if they understand those methods, if they see a relationship between the CHI and the cases or case rates, and which of those methods or visualizations was most impactful. So after I got all my responses back, I had to sift through a lot of poor quality data, unfinished surveys mostly, and some people who failed the basic tutorial, map reading tutorial. And then I had to score the objective questions. I had to analyze the subjective responses. And then I did some t-tests afterward to see if there was a difference in the mean values for different groups, for different kinds of questions. So I'll go through all that. But first, let's talk about what I learned from my visualizations. So the dot density GIF was really cool. It definitely showed how the CHI changed throughout the year. May 1st is when the CHI was highest across the country, and that chunk between September and November is when it was the lowest throughout the country, so most of the fall. This GIF is really good at showing where the early concentrations of the virus were and showing when the virus had a pretty consistent spread across the country in general. I'm not going to show you the whole GIF, but I'll show you 3 screenshots. The first will be May 1st. So we can see early concentrations were in the Northeast, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and then some smattering in Florida, California, Illinois, places where you'd expect, there's a lot of people living there. There's a lot of cases. And then 4 months after that, we're in September 1st. So this is in that period where the average containment health index is at its lowest, starts now. And we see that concentrations of the virus are now in Florida, California, and it's kind of consistent through Texas and the South. There's still some places that don't look as bad, like West Virginia, New Mexico, New England, the top of New England. And then in 4 months after that, January 1st, 2021, we can see there's a very dramatic difference, a very dense concentration of cases, pretty much across the whole country almost. Very much so in California, very much so in the Northeast, all the way over to Chicago, Florida still. But yeah, not very many places that have, a lower density of dots, except those same states that I mentioned before. Let's talk about the case rate map now. So the case rate indifference is really good at visualizing places that have a lower population and a lower number of cases, but seeing what percentage of the population got infected. And I kind of see that as like, how effective were the government policies in keeping, people from getting infected in their state. So May 1st, not a whole lot to see. We kind of see that dot pattern in some states, but it's not over 2% anywhere at this point. 4 months after that, September 1st, we see that it's consistently over 2% in the South. New York is at 2.2%, but then you've got places like Arizona and Nevada, which have, much smaller population, and, less number of cases overall, but higher case rates than even in New York. 4 months after that, January 1st, it's a very different story. And there's a lot of states that have over 7% case rates, and the most striking places to me are North and South Dakota, which are even over 10%. And that wouldn't really stand out on the other map, which just shows the number of cases, but case rate map definitely stands out. And then also stands out are places with much lower case rates than their neighbor, like Washington and Oregon and New Hampshire, which has 3.3%. What did I learn from my Tableau visualizations? The interactive aspect of it was really nice, but I think the chart was more helpful in showing any correlations or possible relationships in cases and deaths and containment health index than the map. The map, there's just limited cartographic options in Tableau, so doing something more than that choropleth map wasn't really in the cards for me. Let's talk about my bivariate map. So this bivariate map uses equal interval ranges, and it really focuses on states in that bright purple color where they had a high containment health index and a low case rate. Basically, states that had successful policies in preventing widespread, cases of the virus. Washington, Oregon, West Virginia, Maryland, and those upper New England states. And we could kind of see those in the other visualizations too. And then the rest of the country is in those middle ranges. The other map uses natural breaks, and this really focuses states in that that low containment health index and high case rates. So kind of the opposite, cases that's states that didn't do very much policy-wise and had a lot of their population infected. And you can see there's not a couple of them, there's actually a handful of them. That peachy kind of color, everywhere from Nevada going all the way down to the south. A lot of states in that middle part of the country. And then that other category where they have maybe a mid-range containment health index and a high case rate. A lot of these green states too. I like this map because it's not as geographically uniform as the other one. You can see a bit more difference with states and their neighbors. All right, let's talk about my results from the survey. So I asked 2 questions of all my respondents at the beginning of the survey: if they were satisfied or dissatisfied with government policies, and if they thought government policies were effective or not. And as you can see, almost half of my respondents were either extremely dissatisfied or somewhat dissatisfied with government policies. And 46% were either thought the policies were not effective at all or only slightly effective. 25.6% of all of my respondents were both dissatisfied and thought policies were ineffective. So that's really interesting. That tells you something. Not a lot of people happy with how government has responded to the virus. Surprise, surprise. So, you know, that's what I was hoping to see if that played an impact on how people understood the visualizations. So I mentioned I calculated the scores of my objective questions. On the left here, it shows how long people took to complete my survey, and then how their mean scores for those 5 different groups were affected, not directly affected by that, but you can kind of see that the people who took longer to complete my survey on average had higher objective scores, which honestly was a problem with my survey. And in the future, I would definitely want to fix that. The objective scores for my survey were all over the place. You can see that a lot of people scored in that 25 to 50% range on these different categories. Those are the different visualization categories. And so once I saw that, I knew I couldn't really rely on the objective questions to be a good indicator of whether or not people understood the maps. I really had to look at if they perceived a relationship between the containment health index or not. So looking at that question, that shows a little bit more of a normalized bell curve for all of my categories. A lot of people saw some possible relationship from my maps. Probably the most successful was the dot density. People were really unsure about the bivariant maps. And I mentioned t-tests. So I looked at the difference in the mean scores for some groups, and the case rate map really stood out because people who were over and under 40 were dissatisfied and satisfied with government policies and thought policies were ineffective and effective, had different, statistically different mean scores in those groups when perceiving a relationship with the CHI and the case rates on that case rate GIF that I talked about earlier. So that shows that there is some possible bias there in how they interpreted that map, at least statistically, I guess. And then how they ranked the maps, what was easiest to understand, what was most aesthetically pleasing, and what was most compelling. The dot density map and the Tableau maps took first and second place, and consistently worst were the bivariate maps. People did not like or understand those, which, you know, bivariate maps can be hard to understand. But I've been looking at this stuff for months, so, you know, I get it, but someone looking at it right off the bat, yeah, it's going to be tough. So how did I do? I succeeded on visualizing the containment health index over the year. I think my results do show that there are definite correlations between containment health index and cases and case rates. Whether those are causal relationships or not, I don't think I can prove that. Further examination of these things would be one of my early goals, seeing if there were demographic or environmental factors in mapping out the spread of the virus. Exploring non-cumulative case measurements would definitely help. And then one day, maybe someone can do that index on a county level for each state. That would be really cool, but it'd be a huge undertaking. And then I had not a lot of experience with surveys. So there's a lot I could have done to design my survey better. And, you know, exploring the link between opinions on government policies and how to interpret these maps would definitely be worth looking into further. So overall, I did show some correlations between case rates and CHI, and my survey had a lot of mixed results, but I think opinions of government policies did play a role in map interpretation. So there we are. Thank you for watching, and yeah.